Welcome back to Fullerton College Print 75 and 77 Pre-Press. This is Professor Ben Hewitt broadcasting, well, it's live to me, from Corona, California, where the winds are cutting through and tearing the trees to pieces outside my window. We are continuing on to take a look at our PIA's Pre-Press Training Manuals 3.4 Font Management. And where we last stopped, we talked about web core fonts and what they're needed for. For this one, you want to move them, if you're still moving your fonts around to manage them on a Mac, move them to your library fonts folder. Then you have to restart the computer. If you don't restart, the computer doesn't remap all these font locations. Now let's talk about something more interesting, font use and legality. A lot of people have asked me, since I do teach printing, about copyright law, and it is more complicated than I even really have a great understanding of. So generally speaking, if you're worried about copyright, try to play it as safe as possible. It's very difficult to navigate and do those things in ways that allow you to skirt the edges of copyright just right to get away with what you're trying to get away with. Big companies with good lawyers may be able to pull that off, but small individuals like myself don't even try it because we will get squashed in court, even if we do something that's kind of semi-legal. Anyways, so licensing comes from these different people who sell fonts based off of, if you paid for the use of it, because a font is a useful thing created by professionals who ought to be paid for their time and effort. And you need to see what the licenses are. Like a lot of foundries, Adobe does it by computer, not by person, not by service bureau. Each person in the service bureau is supposed to have a copy. You can't just buy Helvetica and give it to everyone in the building. Each person needs to have a license. That's the idea anyways. So that is something to watch out for. Although a lot of the ones that just come with a Creative Cloud, if everyone has a Creative Cloud anyways, they already have that font, and that is helpful. Transporting fonts is also a sticky topic. Adobe doesn't want you to transport their stuff around. You can take the copy to a commercial printer to print it, but if they're going to be using it to process the file and make it better or make changes, that's a value-added service, and they need to own a copy as well. They need to have a valid license for it, because they consider the fact that if you edit someone else's file, you're doing work that earns you money and earns them money. Therefore, the people who made the font you're editing with want their cut. So everyone should have a valid license if you're going to make edits. Font embedding in a PDF, typically, viewing and printing is okay. They're fine with you embedding it into a font to give out to a printer or to send to someone else for a proof purpose, so long as they can't then install the font and use it to make money on their side. Again, if you edit a file, that adds value to the file. It's actually kind of true, because a properly spelled postcard mailer with advertising on it is much more effective than an improperly spelled postcard with advertising content on it. So editing and making things more effective actually adds value. Therefore, they want everyone involved in those processes to pay for their copies. Now, here is one of the trickiest things out there, is doppelganger fonts. I guess I just wanted to say doppelganger, but you got to watch out for the doppelgangers and save it for Queen Doppelpopulus. One of the scariest things to me is not missing fonts, but replaced fonts that happen without your knowing. Different manufacturers can make the same typeface. Different foundries can all create them. If they're based off a historical type, like Garamond or Berkeley or Baskerville or Caslon, or let's go straight forward on this one, guys. The font that terrifies me the most as a printer, no, as a pre-press operator, is Times New Roman. I know people hate fonts like Comic Sans and Papyrus because they're ugly and it's fashionable to despise the ugly fonts. But if you get one of those, they're probably going to print correctly. The one that terrifies me is, again, Times New Roman, because there are so many versions of Times New Roman out there. And sometimes there's slight variations in the name, but a lot of times there just isn't. Everybody makes a Times New Roman. It's so generic that it's available everywhere. You got store brand Times New Roman, you got Adobe Times New Roman, you got Microsoft Times New Roman, and Mac Times New Roman. And they're all out there and they're all roughly the same, except they're not quite the same. If you are doing some tight typesetting and you're fitting stuff into an exact amount of space, which is common for professional design and layout for what we print, you are really accounting for every little micrometer of space, or micrometer, sorry. Micrometer measures these things. Micron of space on that paper. Every little tiny bit of layout space is accounted for, even if it's negative space and white space. And I know clients don't love that stuff, but we designers do. It's still accounted for and used appropriately. And that font fits where you put it. And you did your formatting based off of one version of Times New Roman. And if you open it up somewhere else with a slightly different version of Times New Roman, the letters may not be the same size or proportion, so it may not look the same. But the worst thing for me is, remember that words is the wrong word there. Remember that typefaces, fonts, are more than just the shapes of the letters. The shapes of the letters are part of what makes a font a font. The space between them, the counters, the negative space between letter to letter, the amount of kerning and leading, or no, not leading, yeah, but kerning, leading, and tracking that exists naturally, what its base starting point is, matters a whole lot. Because if you try to use a wrong version of a font, whether or not you know you're doing it, the computer will say, oh, Times New Roman, that's Times New Roman, no problem. And it will substitute your version for the version your client sent. And your version might just have a hair, just a smidge, a dash, a pinch, more or less space between the letters. And that adds up really quick to the point where suddenly text doesn't fit on the page anymore and it overflows and you lose it. And that really awesome layout that was created just dies. So this is why you try to get the fonts sent from your clients whenever possible, because you can avoid this, make sure you're using their version. The other workaround we already talked about in this chapter previously is to get them to outline their type into vector information, because once it's just vector and it's in a PDF preserves vector really nice. It doesn't change anything. And that's what you're looking for, preserved and not changed. You got to find out where it comes from. You can look into these things underneath your information to find out where you can buy it from, how you can find it. You can use pre-flight software, or if you're on a Mac, you just say get info. I believe you can do this on a Windows computer as well. Styles. Let's talk about styles. A full typeface family includes properly designed basic or Roman or text. They call it plain, bold, italic, semi-bold, italic versions of the same type design. The best one of this is Helvetica Neue or New, or I don't know how to pronounce that word. I'm sorry, guys. I'm failing you. I don't have it. Anyways, if you have something like the Helvetica that comes with the Adobe suite, and it has like 20 or so different versions, let me show you what I mean. Let's just scroll down here. Helvetica Neue has 14 versions of itself. And if you look at it, you have condensed bold, condensed black, ultralight, ultralight italic, thin italic, light italic, regular italic, medium italic, bold, and bold italic. 14 versions of the same font with different styles of it, different weights, as we often call them. I really do like the ultra thin. I know that's probably a little bit passe. It's probably very 2010. But man, I thought that was like the coolest style ever when I first saw it. I remember I was on a movie poster for a Jane Eyre adaptation that came out in like 2010, 2011 that I went to with my wife, and good movie, good story. But I loved that film poster. It was so graphically cool, that ultra thin, all lowercase. Anyways, let me stop fawning over a font and let's go back to our actual lecture. In addition to doppelganger fonts, there's also the fonts that are in disguise or putting on airs, like the kids standing on each other's shoulders in a tall trench coat trying to buy movie tickets to an R-rated movie in like every single TV show ever. There are fonts that say, look, I'm italic, or look, I'm bold, but they're not. If you're working with InDesign and creating there, these aren't problems you're going to create. But if they come from Microsoft Word or some of the other intermediate level type programs out there that let you use type, you might find yourself using a weird version. Stylized instead of styled means that instead of using the other version of Helvetica, the computer kind of cheats to make its own version. So one of the issues is making bold using stylized font often means they put a small stroke, and they stroke it by a pixel. As you may have noticed so far in our pre-press class, pixels are not a measurement that we use in printing, unless you're talking about pixels per inch, because you're trying to figure out how many pixels are in a rasterized photo to get it to print correctly. But we don't measure things in pixels. The problem with that is one pixel is defined, as we know from our resolution dependent talks about pixel-based raster images, pixels don't mean anything in real measurements. They are completely arbitrary and can be modified based off of a bunch of different things. So they're not a consistent size. That means that if you print on a 300 dpi output, that one pixel stroke that they added to the type to make it bold will show up as one pixel and look about right. There are other problems because stroking, no guffawing, strokes don't necessarily knock out. A lot of them are set to overprint for trapping reasons on plate setters and output devices. That means that the font is semi-transparent, really. It means part of the letter will be printed on top of what's next to it instead of knocking something all the way out. It can be an issue. Also, the same stroke, if you're using a better plate setter, which uses 22,540 machine pixels per inch, that means you're going to get a 2/2500th of an inch thick line around the outside edge of your type to make it look bold. And if you're lucky, that might look semi-bold, but it ain't going to look bold. So really, whenever possible, do not use stylized fonts. Use font styles. Use the actual Foundry created version that's a little bit different. That's what you're supposed to do. Also, to avoid incorrect printer font substitutions, you should avoid stylized fonts when you create documents. And if you see that, you can often see, if you see an attribute in brackets, when you're looking at a font on your computer, it'll say like Helvetica bold with those little greater than, less than brackets on the side. That lets you know that it was done by style buttons and not actually the style itself. The good news is a lot of modern page layout software, like the newest InDesigns, if you apply a style in it, it will first look to see, actually, the InDesign won't even do stylized, but most of the modern ones will first look to see if you have that version. If you have Palatino italic, it'll choose that rather than trying to italicize the regular one by just slanting it. You can also, in Quark Express, you can go through and fix stylized fonts. You can say, don't use this, use the real thing. Although a lot of this is automatic in the later versions of everything. And there's also font management software out there. Some of them you use actively, some of them you use passively, like Extensis Suitcase Fusion, Linotype Font Explorer 10. These things let you turn on and off fonts. There's also just regular good old-fashioned font book on your Mac. Let me show you that before we end right now. Here we are back in your regular good old-fashioned desktop. I'm going to open up a font that I have here that I used for an invitation I did once. And this is not the only way to get there, and there's proper ways of going through your applications list to find it. But Font Book on a Mac, if you hit Install Font, we'll open up the Font Book and install the font. Now, I may say I have some problems here. If I look here, it will tell me that I already have it. No, I don't already have it installed. It's not a duplicate. So I can tell it to override and install. But this also then brings me into here. And this is one of the places where I can turn on and off. I can disable the font. I can disable it so it won't be available in other places. Then it shows it as off. And this is how you turn them on and off on a Mac. This will show you all the ones that you currently have on your computer. I like this one, Amarillo. I use it for making my own decals. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope it wasn't too long or too talky of a video. Until we meet again.